HOA cops arrested my sister, but panicked the moment the Secret Service pulled up. I still remember how fast it all unraveled. Just an ordinary afternoon until it wasn't. Mary had just dropped by for a visit when two self-appointed HOA enforcers slapped handcuffs on her like she was a fugitive. There was something off in their eyes, cold, smug, like they were out to prove something. What they didn't know was that behind my sister's steady composure was a truth that would flip the script fast. The moment black SUVs rolled up and federal agents stepped out, their swagger disappeared, replaced with sheer panic. That's where it all began. But before we get too deep, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what's coming. And hey, if this story hits you, let me know. If you liked the video, press 1. If not, hit 0. That feedback keeps me going and helps me bring you more stories that matter. I always thought a neighborhood was supposed to feel safe. The kind of place where you wave to your neighbor, borrow a cup of sugar, and keep an eye out for each other's kids. That image shattered the second I moved to Silver Pine Lane. At first glance, it was the picture of peace, fresh pavement, manicured lawns, hedges trimmed with military precision. Freshly divorced, I'd moved in hoping to rebuild. Mary lived just a few houses down, told me it was the kind of place where neighbors look out for one another. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. The HOA here was notorious for rules so strict they felt like traps. Rules about fence paint, how long your trash could be out, even how many times your dog could bark before triggering a fine. It didn't take long to feel like I wasn't living in a neighborhood. I was living under surveillance. I moved in wanting peace. Instead, I got warning letters over grass height, climbing vines, and imaginary violations. I tried to follow the rules, thinking if I stayed quiet, I could stay out of trouble. But you can't hide from power-drunk people forever. Mary was my anchor. She'd been through storms of her own, served overseas, toughened by diplomacy and real adversity. Calm, clear, but sharp when it counted. So when I vented about the HOA, she didn't tell me to ignore it. She told me to fight back smart. Let's play along for now, she said, but we'll find out who's behind it and bring light to their mess. And just like that, our moment came. Silver Pine Lane's HOA didn't just enforce rules. They had their own little crew, calling themselves the HOA cops. They weren't real cops, of course, just local bullies in cheap uniforms, acting like they ran a fortress. Nobody knew if they had training. They just strutted around barking orders. Mary stopped by one Saturday, fired up after hearing how her friend Shelby across the street had been threatened because her teenage son got dared to hop into the neighborhood dumpster for a lost phone. Apparently, that was enough for the cops to swarm her lawn and throw around threats of arrest. It sounded absurd, but nothing surprised us anymore. What do we do? I asked as she sipped her tea. Her eyes steadied on me, filled with that quiet fire I'd seen since we were kids. We find out who's pulling the strings, and we expose them. Then, as if summoned, two HOA enforcers walked onto my lawn. One short and squat, the other tall and wiry, both smirking like cartoon villains. "You there?" the shorter one barked, pointing at Mary Ann. "You the homeowner?" "No," she replied evenly. "I'm his sister." "Then you're trespassing," he snapped. She blinked. "On my brother's property? That doesn't even make sense." Her voice was calm, but her eyebrows were raised in disbelief. Sure, they'd hassled me before, but this was different. They were accusing my sister of a crime. The tall one chimed in. Per HOA regulation, only homeowners and registered residents can gather on the premises without prior written consent. If you're not on the lease or deed, you need clearance. Mary let out a laugh. "I'm here as a guest. You can't make me leave." The shorter guy stepped forward, chest puffed like a prize rooster. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand. We have authority. If you resist, we can place you under HOA arrest." That's when I stepped in. "Arrest my sister? On what grounds?" I shot back, stunned. The officer whipped his head toward me. "We have reason to believe she's been encouraging neighbors to violate HOA policy, distributing unauthorized flyers, and harassing our officers." It sounded like something ripped from a bad novel. I'd never seen Marion hand out a single flyer. And even if she had, how was that grounds for arrest? Marion didn't flinch. She crossed her arms and stood her ground. "I want to see the rule that gives you that authority. You're acting like vigilantes." Without a word, the shorter officer pulled out a set of handcuffs. The steel caught the midday sun, cold, hard, threatening. "If you don't come willingly, we'll proceed with immediate detention." The HOA board granted us the authority. My stomach turned. You can't be serious, I said, stepping in front of them. The tall officer shoved me hard enough to knock me off balance. I caught myself on the porch railing, heart pounding. Before I could react, they had Marianne restrained. She didn't resist, just looked them dead in the eye, like she was memorizing every detail. Sweat trickled down my neck as they led her off. And just like that, she was gone. Taken where? The HOA's own private jail? I stood on the steps, stunned. That was the moment everything changed for me. I'd always believed in letting things go. But this crossed a line. I needed answers. I needed my sister back. I ran to the HOA's community center, a squat little building next to the tennis courts. Kids played nearby, laughter echoing across the courts, while inside, madness unfolded. I found her locked inside a converted office. No signs, no police, just a heavy lock and men posing as authority figures. The enforcers stood like sentries, arms folded. The same guy from earlier blocked my way. She's staying here until further notice, he said. Until she cooperates. Cooperates with what? I asked, voice shaking with anger. She's interfering in HOA operations. Once we question her, if she agrees to follow the rules, she can leave, with a fine. It was unreal. I tried calling the police. They said it was a civil matter, private property, HOA jurisdiction. If you want to file a complaint, we'll review it. No urgency. No promises. I felt powerless. My sister was locked up by a bunch of neighborhood tough guys playing security. Then I noticed a man in the back. Older, pressed suit, not in uniform. He leaned on a desk, arms crossed, calm. There was something in the way he watched, almost like he knew me. Our eyes met. A flicker of recognition. Then he turned away, staring at his phone. I wanted to confront him. He said nothing. The enforcers forced me out. Go home, one warned. Or deal with the consequences. For a second, I almost welcomed the fight. But Marianne always told me to choose my battles. I left, but not in defeat. I left knowing I'd find another way. That night, I was a wreck. I couldn't sit still. I called everyone I knew, scanned every neighborhood Facebook group. Most people were scared, but a few whispered their support. Some even suggested staging a scene outside the center. But something told me to wait, to plan. At 2 a.m., I finally fell asleep, phone clutched tight. Next morning, I woke to a loud knock. My heart dropped. I braced for HOA thugs. But when I opened the door, there stood 3 men in dark suits. They flashed badges. Secret Service, one said. We need to talk. I froze. What's going on? The one in front, Agent Corbin, looked tense. We're looking for a woman named Marianne. We have reports she was seen in this neighborhood. My mind raced. She's my sister, I said slowly. But the HOA has her. They took her yesterday. Even as I spoke, it sounded insane. Agent Corbin's expression shifted from concern to something harder. The HOA has her in custody? He glanced at his team. Take us to her. Now. I didn't pause for a second. We crossed the street, made our way down 2 blocks toward the community center. The morning sun felt too bright, almost mocking, considering what was about to go down. Neighbors stepping out for their newspapers froze when they spotted the black SUVs rolling up behind us. Word spread fast. By the time we reached the building, a small crowd had already formed. The self-proclaimed HOA enforcers had stationed themselves near the front doors. Their usual smug confidence vanished the second they locked eyes with real federal agents. No more smirking, just pale faces and nervous glances. Agent Corbin stepped forward, voice like steel. We have reason to believe you're detaining a federal witness and violating her civil rights. Step aside. The short enforcer's jaw twitched. For a split second, I thought he might dig in his heels. But then he cleared his throat. We need to see some ID, he mumbled, his bravado gone. Corbin didn't even blink. One quick flash of his badge and credentials, and the man nearly stumbled backward. This way, he muttered, defeated. We made our way down a tight hallway toward a cramped office. There she was, my sister, still cuffed to a metal chair. Her eyes lit up when she spotted Agent Corbin. Thank heavens, Marianne breathed. One of the Secret Service agents immediately moved in, unlocking her restraints. It all played out like slow motion, the so-called enforcers backing up, panic stretching across their faces. The man in the suit from the day before stood nearby too, silent, arms folded, just watching. My body trembled as relief hit me. Marian stood, her wrists raw and red. Corbin turned his focus on the man in the suit. "I've been looking for you, Campbell. You've been real good at hiding." The air thickened. So he wasn't just some HOA lackey. He was the real target. Campbell didn't say a word. Corbin shifted his gaze to Marianne. "We got your message. Came as soon as we could. You okay?" She nodded, rubbing her wrists. "Better now that you're here." I stood frozen, my thoughts racing. What connection did my sister have with the Secret Service? Before I could ask, the HOA enforcers tried to slip out. "Not so fast," Corbin barked. "You're staying right here until local law enforcement arrives." The look on their faces said it all. They knew it was over. The paper-thin power they clung to had shattered under the weight of real authority. The next hour was chaos. Local police, who had brushed me off days before, now flooded the scene after being called in by the Secret Service. The community center buzzed with flashing lights and shell-shocked officers. The HOA enforcers were questioned, pressed hard about their tactics. Eventually, they were cuffed and let out, charged with unlawful detention and intimidation. Some sputtered about just following orders, but the man calling the shots, the HOA president, Kyle Beck, was nowhere to be found. Marianne and I were escorted back home by Corbin and his partner. Once inside, he handed her a glass of water, and they spoke quietly. I couldn't take it anymore. "What is going on?" I asked. "Marianne, how do you know the Secret Service? Why'd they come for you?" She let out a long breath, shoulders slumping. "I've been helping them on the side," she said. "That guy Campbell? He's been under suspicion for document forgery and funneling money to extremist groups. I saw him months ago at a community event." I blinked. "So, the guy pretending to be an HOA consultant was actually forging documents?" She nodded. "He embedded himself in the HOA. Certain board members, probably even Kyle, were profiting off dirty deals. That's why they fought so hard to keep me out. They accused me of meddling when I was just trying to protect people." Corbin cut in. "We believe Campbell and the HOA president were using the HOA to launder money. By threatening residents with fines and seizing properties, they collected untraceable cash. Your sister's efforts to help the neighbors? That's what tipped us off." I looked at Marianne, realization setting in. "So that's why you always asked me to keep things quiet. You knew something big was happening." She nodded again, her eyes glassy. "I didn't want to drag you into it until it was safe. I had to wait for the right moment to reach Corbin. But once the HOA came after me, everything spiraled. I wasn't in control anymore." A swirl of anger, relief, and frustration bubbled just beneath the surface. What started as an absurd HOA disaster had become something darker, a full-blown criminal web. "What about the revenge we wanted?" I muttered, still feeling that helplessness. Then I saw Marianne's wrists, now free but marked with fresh bruises. That's when it hit me. Justice was the best kind of revenge. In the days that followed, the collapse was fast and explosive. Campbell was taken into custody. Local news went wild covering the unraveling of the HOA. Some called it a disaster. Others called it justice delayed. The whole board stepped down amid swirling accusations of fraud and corruption. The fake officers who'd locked up Marianne were charged. Kyle Beck, the ghost president of the HOA, disappeared, supposedly vanishing overnight. Rumors flew about sightings in nearby towns, but no one could pin him down. The Secret Service even issued alerts. Our neighborhood breathed easier as the shadow that had loomed over it seemed to lift. But for me, peace was still out of reach. Not until Beck was found and held accountable. Through the media chaos, Marianne was my rock. Reporters circled us like sharks, demanding interviews. We stayed quiet, waiting for the storm to pass. Some neighbors came up to thank us. A few blamed us for ruining the neighborhood. That part made me laugh. What reputation were they trying to save? One night, I walked into the kitchen and found Marianne poring over a thick folder. "What's all that?" I asked softly. She looked up, eyes heavy with purpose. "Evidence," she said. "Shelby gave it to me, remember her?" She and a few others dug up old financial records the HOA took from them. "It's enough to trace the money straight to Beck. If I can piece it all together, maybe the feds can finally find him." "Is that safe? Shouldn't Corbin handle it?" I asked. "I will," she said, exhaling. "But I don't trust them to put the puzzle together. I have to do this. For everyone he hurt. I need to finish this." Her conviction lit something inside me. All the humiliation, the fear, the way Beck twisted our neighborhood into something it was never meant to be. It all came back. He arrested my sister. He made me afraid in my own home. And now, I wanted him to know what it felt like. I'm in, I said, placing a hand on her shoulder. So we dove in. Days and nights spent buried in files, bank transfers, property deeds, shell charities. Every spare moment went to the search. Mary Ann was sharp. Years with the Peace Corps and nonprofits had trained her to notice patterns. She found recurring transfers to suspicious charities at precise intervals. They weren't real. They were shells connected to extremist groups. The deeper we went, the angrier we got. The HOA's tyranny wasn't isolated. It was the surface of something bigger, and we were going to end it. About a month after it all blew open, a friend at the local PD reached out. Beck had been spotted in a small town 2 hours away, using a fake name. Someone had recognized him from a news clip. I called Agent Corbin, but he was reassigned, waiting on official leads. That wasn't fast enough for me. I felt something snap into place, like a mission I had to finish. Marian hesitated when I said we should go check it out ourselves, just to confirm. Then call it in. She was right, it was risky. But all I could see were her handcuffs, the way people lived in fear. I needed this. I'm tired of feeling like a victim, I told her. She nodded. She understood. So we made a plan. We left at dawn, adrenaline pumping like we were undercover agents. Marianne's phone kept lighting up with calls from Corbin. We silenced them. The tip led us to a rundown motel at the edge of a forgettable town. Paint peeling, neon sign flickering, empty parking lot. My stomach churned. We parked behind tall shrubs, scanning every door. Then, after nearly an hour, he stepped outside. My breath hitched. He was disguised, baggy clothes, baseball cap, but it was him. Same wide forehead, sharp nose, eyes that gleamed with something rotten. Marian looked at me. I nodded. She opened her phone, ready to dial 911, but didn't press send. We weren't going to do anything crazy. Just snap a photo, confirm it was him, and let the authorities do their job. But life doesn't always follow the script. Just as we started to move, circling around for the photo, Beck looked straight at us. His face contorted the moment he recognized us. Then, without a word, he took off, sprinting across the parking lot like his life depended on it. Fear punched me straight in the gut, but instinct kicked in fast. Mary Ann and I bolted after him, yelling, "Stop!" Like that ever worked on someone like Beck. He cut hard around a corner, disappearing down an alley. We chased him, adrenaline burning in our veins. My shoes slapped against the concrete, lungs straining. I nearly tripped over a sidewalk crack, but Mary Ann caught me just in time. We rounded the corner, and there he was, trapped against a chain-link fence, nowhere left to run. He snarled, "What do you want?" Eyes wild, scanning for any escape route. Mary Ann raised her phone and snapped a picture. "We have proof," she said, breathless but steady. "It's over, Beck." His eyes narrowed, voice full of venom. "You nosy." He lunged, going straight for her phone. For a split second, I thought he'd hit her. My pulse spiked. But the image of my sister, tied to a chair in that suffocating office, flashed through my mind. He did that. Rage surged. I stepped between them and shoved him back. He slammed into the fence with a metallic thud. "You destroyed lives," I said through clenched teeth. "You locked my sister up, bullied innocent neighbors, and now you're trying to bolt?" He spat hatred, face twisted with fury. "You don't know who you're messing with. I've got connections. I can bury you." His threats didn't scare me anymore. "Good," I snapped. "Let them try. We're done being afraid." Mary Ann still held the phone, recording everything. Beck snarled and pushed off the fence, ready to charge. But before he could move, tires screeched behind us. 2 unmarked SUVs flew into the alley. My heart stalled, then soared as Agent Corbin stepped out, weapon drawn. "Call Beck," he barked, hands in the air. Beck froze, the fight drained from his face. He raised his hands. Agents swarmed, slammed him to the ground, cuffed him. As they dragged him off, he threw us one last hateful glare. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, calm settling in my chest like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the revenge I imagined. But watching him helpless, no longer holding the strings to our misery, felt better than I ever thought it would. Corbin dusted himself off and gave us a look. "You could have gotten yourselves killed," he scolded, but there was a flicker of respect behind it. "We tracked your phone. We figured you might do something bold." Mary Ann offered a faint smile. "Thanks for backing us up." Corbin nodded. "We've got it from here. Beck's not slipping away this time." Watching him disappear into that black SUV made it real. He was in custody, and for the first time, we could breathe again. Later that afternoon, Marion handed Corbin all the files we'd collected. He seemed genuinely thankful. Promised us Beck would face justice. Promised the system wouldn't let him walk free. When we finally got back to Silver Pine Lane, everything looked different. That looming threat hiding behind every polished hedge was gone. Neighbors waved. Some offered to help carry groceries. A new HOA board was forming, this time under strict oversight, real transparency. Some folks wanted to scrap the whole HOA idea, but in the end, they kept a stripped-down version just to manage the basics. No more enforcers. No more abuse. In the days that followed, the tension slowly lifted. Kids played in driveways again. No one froze up when someone walked by their yard. Marianne, healing, started returning to her usual self, steadfast and kind, always ready to lend a hand or patch a broken fence. I joined a local support group for people who dealt with neighborhood harassment. I took what we lived through and used it to help others find their voice. The police even came forward with an apology, admitting they'd failed us. Said they'd take HOA disputes more seriously going forward. Whether they would or not, time would tell. But it was something. I found purpose again, advocating, speaking out, reminding people they didn't have to take it. I even hosted a small meetup in the park, a safe space where neighbors could talk, vent, laugh about old threats, and find comfort in each other's stories. For a while, reporters still lingered on the edge of our block. But the news cycle moved on, and so did we. Life began to feel normal, maybe even better than normal. One sunny afternoon, Marianne and I took a walk past the newly replanted flower beds lining the main street. The air smelled like fresh soil and new beginnings. We chatted about small things, a new coffee shop, maybe planning a trip to visit family. We didn't talk about Beck, not because we forgot, but because he no longer defined our lives. As we passed the community bulletin board, now filled with simple, reasonable guidelines, nothing overreaching, Marianne paused. "You feel better now?" she asked, voice low. I took a breath so deep, I could feel it all the way down. "Yeah," I said. "I really do. I do. There's still a part of me that feels the weight of everything we endured, but at least now, fear isn't part of it." Her eyes softened. "I'm proud of you, sis. We stood tall, reclaimed what was ours, our dignity, our freedom, and we never backed down." I slipped my arm around hers, feeling that unshakable connection between us. "We did," I murmured. And in that moment, standing beneath the gentle warmth of the sun, for the first time since moving into this suffocating neighborhood, I finally felt at home. Not because I'd changed the house or obeyed every ridiculous rule, but because I'd found my voice again. My sister was safe. Our community was on the mend. And the man who tried to dominate us all, he was behind bars. Did we get revenge? In a way. We dismantled a cruel system that had manipulated our lives. But even more than that, we uncovered something far more powerful than vengeance. We rediscovered our strength. We found unity in standing together. Even the neighbors who once peeked out from behind their blinds stepped forward in the end, sharing their stories and the proof that helped bring justice. Beck's downfall wasn't just ours. It came from a whole neighborhood that decided it wouldn't be controlled anymore. Soon, Marianne would start her next chapter, talking about diving back into nonprofit work, maybe even running for city council. As for me, I chose to stay on Silver Pine Lane, not to relive the past, but to help this place become something better. And slowly it did. After Beck's sentencing, a quiet peace settled over the block. People spoke of closure. Some called it karma. But what gave me the most peace was knowing we'd paved the way for those who came next. No one else would have to endure the twisted injustice that had nearly broken us. And if that isn't victory, I don't know what is. That's how we turned our nightmare into a hard-earned win. From HOA arrests to a jaw-dropping visit from the Secret Service, this story shows that even in your darkest hour, resilience can lead the way to justice. My sister and I came through stronger, closer, and more ready than ever to protect what matters. Have you ever faced a challenge that felt too big to fight? Sometimes all it takes is bravery and a few people you trust to bring down even the loudest, most entitled bully. If this story inspired or entertained you, be sure to like, share with a friend, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Thanks for being here.